Resident Evil stands as a landmark in survival horror, a series that has entranced audiences around the world with its masterful fusion of suspense, action and fear. But beyond its chilling monsters and gripping narratives lies a deeper, more resonant component, its meticulously designed locations. These settings have become so iconic that a single word mention instantly evokes the hair-raising memories of wandering through dimly lit hallways and confronting the unknown lurking in every shadow. Across the franchise, a single design philosophy unites these settings: the labyrinth. Here, a labyrinth is not just a physical maze, it's an experience, a psychological puzzle. A series of daunting passages and dead ends that bewilder and unsettle. These environments do not merely serve as backgrounds, but stand as characters in their own right. Each room, each corridor is an enigma, demanding focus and fortitude, heightening the player's immersion by engaging both curiosity and dread. In Resident Evil, the simple act of exploration becomes a nerve-wracking journey, a test of mind as much as reflex. Of all the iconic settings, none have etched themselves into the annals of horror like the mansion. This mansion isn't just a building, but a haunting manifestation of Victorian architecture at its most oppressive and grandiose. Its sweeping staircases, cavernous halls, and abandoned rooms possess an eerie stillness, an unsettling silence that suggests something unseen, something sinister. It draws us in with the promise of secrets, yet keeps us on edge, invoking that primal fear of what lies just beyond the door or hidden in the next dark corner. The mansion serves as more than a mere backdrop. It embodies the unknown, a mystery within walls, compelling us to confront the secrets we instinctively fear. The act of unearthing its hidden history and peeling back layers of long-buried stories become a potent driver for the player. Each puzzle solved, each mystery unravels, bring a sense of satisfaction tinged with trepidation, a balancing act between the exhilaration of discovery and the compulsion to retreat. But how did these once regal Victorian mansions, symbols of 19th century wealth and social stature, transform into emblems of terror in the Western imagination? What dark journey converted these majestic spaces into settings of dread, redefined by their ominous atmosphere and sense of menace? Join us as we delve into the history, evolution and psychology behind this transformation, unraveling how the mansion moved from opulence to the grotesque and in the process shaped the world of Resident Evil into an unforgettable, fear-inducing masterpiece. In the latter half of the 19th century, America stood as a nation divided, grappling with profound contrasts. Following the Civil War, the North surged into a new industrial age, a time of immense fortunes built by railroad tycoons and factory magnates. Their wealth demanded symbols, tangible markers of their success, and thus rose the Victorian mansion, towering, ornate, and undeniably extravagant, each one a proud monument of the Gilded Age's grandeur. Yet beneath this surface of prosperity, a different story unfolded. The South, left in the economic wreckage of war, carried the weight of loss and despair. War survivors and veterans returned to communities, offering little support. In northern cities, tenement buildings swelled as waves of immigrants arrived, providing the labour for industry's rapid growth. The gap between wealth and poverty grew glaring, exposing the dark undercurrents of America's economic expansion, a stark contrast to the stately homes of the elite. These Victorian mansions, once revered as symbols of luxury, began to draw public ire as critics like architect Talbot criticised these homes as wooden monstrosities, gory reminder of a bloated age that clashed with America's evolving values. By the turn of the century, the nation was shifting towards modernity, and those once glorified homes, symbols of wealth, stood abandoned, left to decay as relics of morally questionable era. As World War I drew to a close, a new generation of Americans viewed the world through a fresh lens, disenchanted by industrialization and the rise of mass-produced goods. They saw Victorian mansions as embodiment of a decaying past. By the 1920s, society embraced a simpler aesthetic, shunning the elaborate architecture of previous decades. Victorian homes become silent witnesses to America's shifting values. Grand facades now hollow echoes of a bygone age. As grand Victorian mansions slipped into disrepair, the elegant facades and stately rooms began to take a new, haunting identity. Once symbol of wealth and prestige, these empty homes become canvases for the strange and the macabre, their peeling walls whispering forgotten tales to those who dare to listen. In the 20th century, artists and filmmakers found new inspiration in their decayed beauty. Where some saw ruins, others saw stories waiting to be told. Places alive with a dark mystery that called out to the imagination. The illumined facades and shadowed interiors transformed these forgotten mansions into icons of fear and intrigue, hallmarks of the supernatural and the unknown. Painter Edward Hopper was instrumental in redefining the place of the Victorian mansion in the American psyche. His House by the Railroad 1925 depicts a solitary, forbidden structure, its presence stark and looming against a barren landscape. Hopper's painting captures something universal, resonating as an image of isolation and abandoned history, a house holding secrets within its walls. Charles Ephraim Birchfield's House of Mystery casts these old mansions in an even more spectral light, wrapping them in an atmosphere of shadows and secrets. His art beckoned viewers into a place where the ordinary turned strange, where the past lingered as a haunted memory. As cinema embraced these themes, the Victorian mansions quickly became a staple of horror. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho introduces to the Bates Mansion, a decayed relic that became as central to the story as the characters within. Its unsettling presence left audiences haunted. The house itself, a twisted mirror of madness.
And in this house, the most dire, horrible events took place.
The Addams family used the mansion as a playful yet macabre backdrop, blending the grotesque with the eccentric, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre pushed this darkness even further, transforming a decrepit house into an emblem of unspeakable terror. What began as monumental to wealth and opulence were recast as timeless icons of fear and mystery. These forgotten mansions, once proud symbols of status, become cinematic vessels of our deepest fears and wildest imagination. In their decaying splendour, they stand as a spectral witness to both history and horror, a reminder that every house holds secrets waiting to be unearthed. As art expanded into new territories, its latest frontier would emerge in an unexpected form: the world of video games. In the 1970s, video games were an unearthed landscape filled with boundless possibilities and limited only by the technology of their time. Among these early experiments was the notion of the haunted house, a familiar theme that now found itself reframed within interactive entertainment. It was in 1972 on the Magnavox Odyssey, the world's first home gaming console, that gaming audiences were introduced to the haunted house, an early and rudimentary exploration of horror in a digital world. Though simple, this marked a pivotal moment. A spark was lit, setting horror in a new, interactive path. The late 1970s brought a wave of innovation with the Atari 2600, a technological leap that expanded the visual and the interactive scope of gaming. With this, a more immersive haunted house was introduced, offering player a world of interconnecting room and basic navigation system. For the first time, a game began to mimic the suspenseful exploration and puzzle solving that would one day define an entire genre. A foundation was laid, a blueprint for what would evolve into survival horror. The genre continued to take shape in the 1980s. Building on this foundation, in 1987, Lurking Fear, a tabletop role-playing game, offered players an experience rooted in psychological terror. Its eerie settings invited players to imagine themselves wandering the shadowy halls of a haunted school, where every turn could spell danger. That same year, Lucasfilm Games introduced Maniac Mansion for the Commodore 64 and Atari ST, a groundbreaking title that married puzzles and narrative. The game invited players to explore an eccentric mansion populated by strange characters and challenging puzzles, further solidifying the idea that horror could found a new narrative-driven form in games. By 1989, Capcom took a bold step with Sweet Home, a horror-themed role-playing game set in a vast, haunted mansion. Here, player encountered complex exploration mechanics that would later influence the Metroidvania style of gameplay. It was, in many ways, a cornerstone of survival horror, establishing key elements like resource management and environmental storytelling. The genre took another leap forward in 1992 with Alone in the Dark, created by Frederick Reynolds. Set in 1920s Louisiana, Alone in the Dark challenged players to escape from a haunted mansion filled with sinister creatures. This was horror on a new level. The game's 3D graphics, immersive soundtrack, and oppressive atmosphere broke fresh ground, offering players a chilling, real experience. The game proved that horror, when combined with interactivity, could become something powerfully unsettling, drawing players deeper into the world of survival horror. This breakthrough was a call to action for Capcom. Recognizing the potential of horror games, they set out to create something even more ambitious. At the helm of this new project was Chikuro Fujiwara, the mind behind Sweet Home, a director inspired to push the genre forward. Realizing the potential to expand upon his earlier work, Fujiwara made a bold choice. He handed the reins to a rising talent within Capcom, a young developer named Shinji Mikami. An avid horror enthusiast and a fan of films like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Evil Dead, Mikami was no stranger to the power of fear. Under Fujiwara's mentorship, he poured his vision into the project, determined to create an experience that balanced fear and fleeting moments of respite, a combination that would soon define survival horror itself. With a deep appreciation for the genres and nuances, Mikami set out to create an experience that drew from the psychological horror of George A. Romero's Dead series and Lucio Fulci's Zombie, without leaning entirely either into pure horror or pure action. The culmination of Mikami's work was Resident Evil, a game that would redefine horror gaming forever. At its core was Spencer Mansion, a character unto itself, with winding corridors, hidden passages, and a dark past. Looked to be modelled after the grandeur and menace of Stephen King's Overlook Hotel from The Shining. The Spencer Mansion cast an imposing shadow over the gameplay, its labyrinthine halls shrouded in mystery, its eerie, empty hallways barely illuminated, as if someone had just left invited players to explore while hinting at darker secrets lurking within. Here, Resident Evil delivered one of its most iconic moments, the turning zombie scene. As a player approaches, they see a creature hunched over a fallen teammate. In a slow, terrifying turn, it reveals a decayed face, void of humanity. This moment, seared into players' memories, would become the defining image of survival horror. The Spencer Mansion itself was designed to be a dynamic threat, with interconnected rooms, secret passages, and pre-rendered backgrounds. It pushed the limits of the technology, fostering a sense of foreboding and urgency. Every echo, every shadow heightened the terror, urging players to scavenge for survival tools as they brave the mansion's deeper horror. Perhaps one of the most unforgettable scares comes in the form of seemingly quiet hallway, until dogs suddenly crash through the windows. A shock that left players breathless and cemented Resident Evil's place in horror gaming history. For those who stepped into Spencer Mansion, the experience of fear and suspense became an indelible memory. With the first Resident Evil, Capcom redefined survival horror genre, blending atmosphere dread with innovative gameplay. The Mansion became not just a setting but a relentless adversary. Its twists and corridors and eerie silence haunted players even decades later. In a remarkable achievement, Resident Evil quickly became the top-selling PlayStation title, capturing the public's fascination as signaling the rise of survival horror. But while players braved the haunted halls of Spencer Mansion, Capcom was already planning its next steps. Resident Evil 2 was in development, initially led by a separate team but soon reshaped by Shinji Mikami himself. Shifting away from the mansion, the sequel introduced players to a chilling new environment, the Raccoon Police Department, a location that would soon become as iconic as Spencer Mansion itself. This wasn't just any police station. Originally an art museum until 1969, the RPD building, with its Gothic Revival architecture, replicated the eerie atmosphere of Spencer Mansion. The transformation of the museum into police department added layers of intrigue to the structure, which retained its grandiose features, elaborate rooms, and haunting puzzles. The building's east and west wings, divided by a central main hall, immediately immersed the players into its ominous aura. Upon entering, you greeted by an imposing statue of Lady Justice, a remnant of its former life as an art museum. A brief backstory reveals that the city purchased the building due to its central location, and Chief of Police Brian Irons, an art enthusiast, redecorated it with lavish artworks, some of which he discarded into storage rooms, adding a layer of neglect to its grandeur. The building's towering pillars and ornate detailing became a perfect parallel to the tension and horror unfolding within its walls. Just like Spencer mentioned, the RPD was filled with intricate puzzle mechanics and backtracking, allowing players to explore every corner of the building. Its atmosphere oozes mystery and suspense as the protagonist discovers horrors bit by bit, guided by the scattered notes and cryptic clues. The physical manifestation of the viral outbreak seeps into every corner, revealing the grotesque consequences of Umbrella's experiments as players delve deeper into labyrinthine halls. The more you explore, the more the building reveals its grotesque, decaying secrets. The RPD's complex design and layered mystery kept players gripped with curiosity. The gameplay mirrored the slow burn tension of Resident Evil 1. Just as the player becomes familiar with their surrounding, the game adapts, presenting new threats and challenges. The environment shifts and more terrifying foes appear, pushing the players to stay alert. The ambient soundtrack too heightens the fear, with the eerie groans of zombies and unsettling background music punctuating the silence. Even the game's save rooms, backed by a comforting melody, provide brief solace in a world overwhelmed by dread. Following the success of Resident Evil 2, Capcom shifted focus to a new project, the Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, expanding on the plot of Resident Evil 2 with a new protagonist, Jill Valentine. While Resident Evil 3 Nemesis moved beyond the confined spaces of a haunted mansion, it introduced a new type of terror in the open streets of Raccoon City. The player had more freedom to explore the urban sprawl, but the game's tension was still palpable, thanks to the ever-present threat of the relentless Nemesis, a near indestructible pursuer that could appear at any moment. The game shifted away from the claustrophobic haunted house concept of its predecessors, but the atmosphere of fear and isolation remained intact. The city itself felt like a ghost town, cut off from the outside world, trapping the players in a constant state of unease. Despite its more open space, Resident Evil 3 retained the signature puzzle solving and exploration elements of the series, grounding it in the franchise root. While the haunted house ambience was dialed down, the game still managed to evoke the familiar dread through its eerie environment and persistent danger. Nemesis became an iconic figure, forever associated with the game's tension and unpredictability, chasing players through the deserted streets with terrifying presence. Though Resident Evil 3 strayed from the traditional haunted house formula, it remains a beloved chapter in the franchise, remembered for its relentless pacing and the unforgettable terror of Nemesis. Even today, it holds a special place in the hearts of fans, continuing the legacy of survival horror that began with the chilling walls of Spencer Mansion. Around the same time as the release of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, Capcom was quietly developing a new title for Sega fans, Resident Evil Code Veronica. This game would serve as the true continuation of the storyline from Resident Evil 2, deepening the series' narrative while maintaining its signature survival horror elements. Code Veronica follows Claire Redfield on her relentless quest to find her missing brother, Chris Redfield. Her search takes a dark turn when she is captured at an Umbrella facility and sent to the mysterious Rockford Island, a remote and foreboding location that serves as the stage for this new chapter of terror. From the outset, the island's atmosphere is drenched in unease. Its crumbling structures, eerie corridors, and labyrinthine layouts evoke the same chilling sense of dread that defined the iconic Spencer Mansion in the original Resident Evil. The game opens in the cold, oppressive prison cells of Rockford Island, a scion of the powerful but decaying Ashford family. The Ashford's palace, with its grand yet decaying architecture, is an unsettling monument to the past glory. Flickering candlelights cast ominous shadow, distant footsteps echo through empty halls, and whispers seem to linger in the air. This regal yet decrepit residence, with its multiple floors and vast basement, invites players to explore every hidden corner, uncovering dark secrets and battling formidable enemies along the way. The mansion's gothic opulence belies the malevolence lurking within its walls. Luxurious sculptures and decadent furnishings speak to the aristocratic lifestyle of the Ashford family. But as players delve deeper, they uncover unsettling clues about the dark history festering beneath the surface. The game doesn't stop at just one eerie location. As the narrative progresses, players are transported to even more foreboding places, including a second manor that feels like a tribute to classic horror literature, its atmosphere dripping with gothic inspiration. A tavern mannequin, smeared with blood and illuminated by dim, flickering light, looms ominously, while swarms of bats add a haunting edge to the scene. The background soundscape deepens the tension, drawing inspiration from films like The Exorcist and the Castlevania series, heightening the sense of dread with every step. One of the game's most intriguing concepts is the split personality of Alfred Ashford, reflected in the design of the mansion itself. Secret passageways and hidden rooms mirror his fractured psyche, though the potential impact of this chilling theme is somewhat diluted by lackluster voice acting. Still, the eerie duality of Alfred's character remains a core part of the game's atmosphere. As players continue through the game, they encounter a strikingly familiar location, Ashford Mansion, a deliberate homage to the Spencer Mansion from Resident Evil 1. This grand estate, with its opulent design and labyrinthine halls, mirrors the wealth and power of the Ashford family, while also revealing their deep-rooted corruption. Beneath its stately facade lies a network of hidden laboratories, where players uncover the dark secrets of the family's twisted experiments. Like Spencer Mansion, the Ashford estate challenges players with complex puzzles, traps and hidden passages, forcing them to carefully explore its every inch in order to survive. Despite its atmospheric strength and tense gameplay, Code Veronica struggled to introduce significant innovation to the series. While it leaned heavily on the familiar haunted house concept that defined its predecessors, it didn't bring a fresh new twist to the formula. This lack of novelty ultimately prompted Capcom to reimagine the direction of the franchise in future titles. Code Veronica holds a special place in Resident Evil saga, delivering a deeply atmospheric experience and continuing the legacy of survival horror with its intricate, fear-inducing location. Still, in 2002, Resident Evil's iconic Spencer Mansion underwent a complete transformation with the release of the remake. This time, the focus shifted even more intensely toward fear and tension, elevating the original game's atmosphere by incorporating new elements and taking inspiration from the horror films like Robert Wise' The Haunting, George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, and Lucio Fulci's Zombie. These influences are apparent not only in the reimagined zombies, but in the mansion's eerie supernatural aesthetic. A darkness now permeated the mansion, its halls barely illuminated by chandeliers and flickering candles, invoking an unsettling mood typical of haunted house scene in horror cinema. While many iconic moments from the original Resident Evil remain intact, they have been expertly reimagined to terrify both returning fans and new players alike. The unforgettable scene where a zombie slowly turns to reveal its grotesque face is now even more horrific. Its decaying flesh, lifeless eyes and rotten appearance push to new levels of revulsion. Yet the horror doesn't stop there. A deadly innovation came in the forms of Crimson Heads, zombies that, when not fully killed, resurrect into faster, more vicious creatures capable of outpacing players in seconds. This new evolution in enemy design heightened the tension, turning every defeated foe into a potential future threat. The remake also expanded the mansion's layout and atmosphere, allowing for deeper exploration and new areas tied more closely to the mansion's sinister history. Puzzles, now more intricate and challenging, felt naturally woven into the environment and storyline. The tragic backstory of architect George Trevor and the horrifying inclusion of his daughter Lisa Trevor added layers of grim narrative depth to the mansion's dark legacy. Sound design was overhauled as well, maintaining the original's nostalgic value, but also injecting the fresh auditory elements that enhanced the haunting atmosphere. This remake truly captured the essence of Haunted House, establishing itself as a masterclass in survival horror. Capcom sought to build on the success of this remake with Resident Evil 0, released in the same year. Although this game attempted to serve as a prequel, it failed to match the brilliance of the Resident Evil 1's remake. Nevertheless, Resident Evil 0 introduced its own unique take on the haunted house concept using two distinct locations, the Ecliptic Express and the Umbrella Training Facility. The Ecliptic Express, a claustrophobic train, was designed with narrow corridors and compact rooms that echoed the confined spaces typical of haunted mansions. The atmospheres of claustrophobia and isolation was a central focus as players navigated this inescapable setting. Cut off from the outside world, protagonists Rebecca Chamber and Billy Cohen were trapped in the middle of nowhere, echoing the same tension found in Spencer Mansion. The train itself played on mystery and exploration, revealing its secrets through environmental storytelling, lore-filled notes, and hidden dangers. Like a haunted house, the train constantly kept player on edge, with its flickering lights, obscure visibility, and distant, unsettling noises designed to provoke paranoia. As the game progressed, the setting shifted to the Umbrella Training Facility, a sprawling mansion that tried to emulate the grandeur and complexity of Spencer Mansion. This location included labyrinthine hallways, puzzles, and exploration, but it lacked the depth and the originality that made the original mansion so captivating. The novelty of Spencer Mansion, with its intricate design and multi-layered secrets, made it feel like a character in its own right, whereas the Umbrella Training Facility felt overly familiar, relying on established tropes without bringing anything fresh to the table. Unlike the original game, which tied its architecture into the broader narrative with the character of George Trevor and his tragic story, the Umbrella Training Facility lacked a compelling backstory that could anchor its puzzles and exploration. While the facility mirrored the gothic architecture and eerie atmosphere of Spencer Mansion, the puzzles were not as thoughtfully integrated, and the backtracking felt more like a chore than an opportunity to delve deeper into the mystery. In the end, Resident Evil 0 offered an enjoyable environment, but it did not push the franchise forward. It remained within the realm of familiarity without breaking new ground. The gaming industry had changed significantly after the release of Resident Evil 0. Driven by technological advancements and new players' expectations, games were now emphasizing storytelling, multiplayer modes, and immersive open-world environments, leaving behind the more confined, linear experiences of the past. In order to keep Resident Evil relevant in this rapidly evolving landscape, Capcom needed to adapt and explore new horizons in horror gaming. This adaptation culminated in the creation of one of the most transformative and influential games of its time, Resident Evil 4. Taking inspiration from the diverse media like Stuart Gordon's Dagon, John Carpenter's The Thing, and the Japanese show The Shadow over Innsmouth, Resident Evil 4 marked a monumental shift in the series. The game broke away from the franchise's traditional fixed camera mechanics and the single location setting that had defined earlier entries. At the helm of this bold reinvention was director Shinji Mikami, whose visionary approach not only changed the course of Resident Evil, but also set new standards for the survival horror genre as a whole. The impact of Resident Evil 4 was profound. No longer confined to the haunted house feel, the game introduced dynamic enemy encounters within intricately designed levels, requiring strategic combat in a fast-paced, adrenaline-fueled adventure. The technical achievement of the game pushed the limits of hardware at the time, making it a game changer for both the franchise and the industry. I vividly remember the shockwaves it sent through the gaming community. Everyone I knew was captivated by its innovative gameplay and heart-pounding action. In the wake of Resident Evil 4's success, Capcom embraced a new philosophy, one that prioritized pushing the boundaries of horror and action. This led to the development of Resident Evil 5, a game that sought to build on its predecessor's formula, but with a stronger focus on action. The claustrophobic, eerie atmosphere of earlier titles gave way to expansive global setting, trading the gothic haunted locations for open environments like the sun-soaked plains of Africa. The shift was as symbolic as it was visual. Gone were the dark corridors and dim lighting of the earlier games, replaced by the bright, bold landscapes that reflected the invulnerability of the protagonist, Chris Redfield. The shift in tone was unmistakable. Whereas early Resident Evil games used shadows and eerie lightnings to evoke sense of dread, Resident Evil 5 turned towards high-octane action, exemplified by moments like Chris punching a boulder with his bare hands, a far cry from the slow, tension-building scenes of the original. The game embraced larger-than-life heroics, more akin to action films like Black Hawk Down and Rambo than survival horror roots that defined the series. Lighting and colour played an essential role in this transformation. Cooperative gameplay further eroded the tension that once defined the series. Any lingering sense of dread was all but removed, and one central haunted house concept, a cornerstone of the franchise, was left behind. The downloadable content Lost in Nightmares briefly revisited this concept but was short-lived, and even there, the fast-paced mechanic fell out of place in what should have been a tense atmospheric experience. Resident Evil 5 was commercially successful and enjoyable in its own right, but it was with Resident Evil 6 that the series spiraled into an identity crisis. In an attempt to appeal to a broader audience, Capcom injected multiple storylines and action-packed sequences that fell little room for the atmospheric immersion that the series was known for. The influence of popular action games like Call of Duty was palpable, as Resident Evil 6 became a shell of its former self, overloaded with bombastic set pieces, fragmented storylines, and rapid pacing that traded tension for spectacle. The haunted house elements in Resident Evil 6 felt disconnected from the overall narrative, serving as isolated moments rather than an integral part of the story. These sections lacked the depth and the emotional weight that made the original mansion setting so iconic. What once felt like an exploration of fear and mystery had devolved into background prop, mere wallpaper for the relentless action scenes that took center stage. Capcom's over-reliance on action, lack of narrative cohesion, and abandonment of the franchise core elements culminated in a game that strayed far from its survival horror roots. Resident Evil 6 disjointed storytelling and excessive focus on flashy cinematic moments rendered the once cherished haunted house concept virtually obsolete. The franchise, which had once defined atmospheric horror, had lost its way, with Resident Evil 6 standing as a cautionary tale of what happens when a series drifts too far from its origins in an attempt to cater to every possible audience. Between 1996 and 2003, Capcom mainline Resident Evil games were redefining horror gaming, with their ominous fixed camera perspective, haunting soundscapes, and labyrinthine settings. Those titles evoke a sense of dread that became the franchise's signature. But behind the scenes, Capcom was eager to experiment, to explore ideas that wouldn't fit within the main storyline. It was this drive that led to a new path, spin-off titles that would allow Capcom to take creative risks while preserving the core identity of the main series. The first of these experiments would take Capcom into uncharted territories, the arcade-inspired first-person shooter. In collaboration with developer TOS, Resident Evil Survivor was born. When Resident Evil Survivor hit the shelves in 2000, it marked a radical departure from the traditional gameplay of its predecessors. Taking inspiration from the popular arcade shooters like House of the Dead, Capcom sought to create a faster-paced, first-person Resident Evil that would appeal to both console gamers and the arcade audience. However, the game's hybrid identity soon became its Achilles heel. Survivor tried to be Resident Evil, but it missed the psychological edge that defined the series. You weren't managing resources or navigating the tense atmosphere. Instead, you were in a linear shootout. The game couldn't quite capture the dread and the suspense because the horror gave way to action at every turn. While the groundwork for innovation was present, Survivor struggled to meet fans' expectations. The eerie tension of exploring darkened hallways was overshadowed by fast-paced gameplay, which failed to recreate the same atmosphere that defined Resident Evil. But Capcom wasn't ready to abandon this experimental approach. Capcom's commitment to capturing the arcade audience continued. Partnering with Namco, they introduced Resident Evil Dead Aim and Dino Stalker. These titles took inspiration from rail shooter mechanics and doubled down on the arcade experience. Dead Aim added a new twist, combining first-person and third-person perspective, a unique choice that Capcom hoped that draw players into the experience. Set aboard the Spencer Mansion, a haunted cruise liner, Dead Aim brought the players back into confined spaces reminiscent of the series' classic haunted mansions. However, the settings attempted to merge arcade action with its atmospheric horror. Yet even with its intricate layout, the game struggled to evoke the same tension that had permeated the original titles. Our goal was to retain the thrill of an arcade shooters, like recreating Resident Evil's atmosphere, but shifting between first and third person proved challenging. It disrupted the flow, making it harder to maintain the horror-driven immersion. As the gaming landscape shifted in the early 2000s, Capcom turned its attention to the growing multiplayer trend, with games like RuneScape and World of Warcraft reshaping online interaction. Capcom introduced Resident Evil Outbreak, a cooperative experience set in Raccoon City at the height of the T-virus outbreak. Outbreak represented a unique fusion of the old and new. Player could once again explore iconic settings, solve intricate puzzles, and feel the looming threat of the undead, but now with the added challenge of online co-op survival. Despite the technical setbacks, long loading times, and limited voice communication, Outbreak became a fan favourite, offering a taste of Resident Evil classic horror through a modern lens. With the success of Nintendo Wii, Capcom saw another opportunity to bring Resident Evil to a new audience by creating Umbrella Chronicles and Darkside Chronicles. Capcom reimagined past Resident Evil games as rail shooters. The retelling condensed major story arcs into an action-packed sequences using motion controls to immerse players further. For some fans, these titles were a welcome nostalgic experience, but for others, the switch to action diluted the franchise's horror elements. Capcom's gamble with these arcade-style games led to mixed reviews, reflecting an ongoing tension between action and horror that would define the series for years. Recognizing the demand for classic horror with the experiment of Resident Evil Outbreak, Capcom returned to Resident Evil's atmospheric roots with Resident Evil Revelations. Set on the abandoned cruise ship Queen Zenobia, Revelations brought back the eerie, confined spaces and oppressive atmosphere reminiscent of the Spencer Mansion. The Queen Zenobia became the perfect setting, the labyrinthine ship lost at sea, where horror could lurk around every corner. While the game was limited by its original 3DS platform, it succeeded in reintroducing the suspense and the psychological tension that had long been absent from the franchise. Revelations became a beloved entry for fans, craving Resident Evil's original horror experience. As Capcom continued experimenting, the franchise veered further into action. Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City attempted to blend multiplayer shooting mechanics with Resident Evil's lore, giving players the chances to see Raccoon City from the perspective of Umbrella's mercenaries. But this fusion of action-focused multiplayer with a horror legacy led to critical disappointment as fans struggled to see how the game fit within the franchise's established world. After years of experimentation, Capcom faced a fractured fanbase. Some loved the action-focused entries, while others longed for a return to horror. In the years that followed, Capcom would confront the difficult question of identity. Could Resident Evil be both innovative and true to its roots? The journey of Resident Evil is one of creative risks and adaptation, a testament to Capcom's relentless pursuit of new ideas. And while some experiments succeeded, others served as valuable lessons, steering the series back toward the horror that defined it. As Capcom looks to the future, Resident Evil stands poised to reclaim its place in the world of survival horror, informed by its past and ready for whatever lies ahead. By 2012, Resident Evil franchise had grown beyond horror. Titles like Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 leaned heavily into action, shifting away from the isolated, dreadful environments that define survival horror. Yet, even as Capcom's focus turned to broader, action-driven gameplay, fans long for a return to the slower, tension-filled experience that originally made Resident Evil famous. In an interview with Gamasutra in March 2012, series producer Masachika Kawata discussed the direction of Capcom aimed to take with Resident Evil. For the North American market, I think the series need to head in that action-oriented direction. Capcom envisioned a franchise catering to a broader audience. Epic, lengthy campaigns and multiplayer modes were meant to redefine the series and surpass the commercial success of Resident Evil 5. Capcom was certain that Resident Evil 6 would appeal to all players, setting a new benchmark for the franchise. But when Resident Evil 6 was released, Capcom faced a reality check. Critics and fans alike found fault with the game's departure from survival horror, feeling that the franchise had lost its identity. Atmosphere, dread, and confined spaces meant to evoke fear and vulnerability. Instead, it became a sprawling, action-heavy experience that fell short of haunting suspense that defined Resident Evil. Sales, while strong, did not meet Capcom's high expectation. In 2013, Capcom CEO Kando Sugimoto took decisive action, shelving a planned Resident Evil 7 project under Kawata's supervision. With this new course correction, Sugimoto reached out to series veteran Jun Takeuchi. Acknowledging the criticism from fans, Capcom decided it was a time for a return to the original survival horror roots that had made this franchise iconic. Takeuchi quickly assembled a small, dedicated team of just 10 people with a clear vision in mind to create a Resident Evil experience that felt eerie, immersive, and rooted in the classic survival horror elements. He recognized that any revival would need to lean into isolated environments, giving fans a new haunted house to explore, filled with hidden terrors. With Resident Evil 7, Takeuchi envisioned an environment reminiscent of the original games, a single, isolated mansion that would be both terrifying and captivating to explore. Designed on horror classics like Evil Dead, Takeuchi and his team designed the Big Estate, a decaying plantation manor echoing the grandeur of Victorian architecture, yet corrupted by mold and filth. To capture the essence of dread, art director Toshihiko Tosada was sent with a core team to explore real-life abandoned locations, Feeling the chill of these forgotten spaces helped the team understand the eerie atmosphere they needed to replicate. Inspired, Takeuchi directed Asada to create a short film depicting the haunted mansion concept to present to Capcom's leadership, ensuring everyone understood the project's unique vision. This visual presentation solidified Takeuchi's vision, gaining an unanimous approval from Capcom's executives and inspiring the art department to fully commit to the project. They brought in lead designers Hiroyuki and Tomonori Takano, who alongside Tasada began shaping the distinct decaying beauty of the Baker estate. One of Takeuchi's biggest challenges was ensuring that the eerie atmosphere of the Baker estate felt real. To accomplish this, the team developed the RE engine, utilizing photogrammetry techniques to capture the house's derelict details. In 2014, Capcom invested in 150 high-performance digital cameras, which allowed the team to faithfully recreate every mold-covered walls, every splintered piece of furniture, and every shadow that stretched across the dilapidated floors. The result was meticulously crafted location, the Baker estate, which in its grandeur felt alive. Layers of mold, disrepair and decay added a claustrophobic isolation, turning each room into a psychological playground for fear. Sound design enhanced the immersive experience with dripping water, faint footsteps and the eerie quiet amplifying the horror. Every detail made the house feel like a character, a silent watcher over the player. The game's use of the first-person perspective, combined with its focus on exploration and survival, created a sense of vulnerability and fear that had been missing from some of the more action-oriented entries in the series. The Baker family, with their grotesque appearances and violent behaviour, served as a primary antagonist, adding a psychological dimension to the horror that made Resident Evil 7 one of the most terrifying entries in the series. The success of Resident Evil 7 demonstrated that there is still a strong demand for survival horror experiences within Resident Evil franchise, and it paved the way for future entries that would continue to explore the theme of isolation, fear and survival that had defined the series from the beginning. With the success of Resident Evil 7 and the new technology, now Capcom wanted to go back to remake some of its original games in the form of Resident Evil 2 Remake. This time around, the RPD station, though familiar, underwent a striking transformation. Darkened corridors illuminated only by the beam of a flashlight heightened the suspense. Ambient audio from raindrops to distant monster sound intensified the sense of vulnerability. This remake also redefined this haunting presence, Mr. X, a constant, unstoppable pursuer, embodying the classic horror archetype of relentless monster. His slow, looming steps in the dark hallways brought a palpable fear, creating a reimagined haunted house experience within this new RPD station. Capcom continued in the same way with the Resident Evil 3 remake. While the remake was not as successful and as well received as the remake of Resident Evil 2 was, it still demonstrated the Capcom's commitment to honouring the past while pushing the series forward. Building upon Resident Evil 7's success, Resident Evil Village brought players into a thematic theme park of horror. Each location was inspired by classic horror motifs. Castle Dimitrescu with its gothic Dracula influence, the lichen-infested village evoking the witch, and the house Benevento inspired by the turn of the Screw's haunted estate. Among these locations, House Benevento exemplified Resident Evil return to haunted house horror, immersing players in psychological tension rather than combat. Trapped and unarmed, players faced disturbing imagery that mirrored personal fear. A giant, grotesque fetus haunted the basement halls, evoking a primal fear of helplessness. a masterclass in horror that stripped away the player's sense of control, leaving only dread. From the Spencer Mansion's hidden terrors to the crumbling grandeur of the Baker estate, haunted spaces have always been the heart of Resident Evil's enduring success. Each location is a character in itself, a labyrinthine world filled with fear, mystery, and the unknown. These iconic environments invite players to explore while holding them captive in dread, a delicate balance that defined the Resident Evil experience. As Capcom continues to evolve the series, it's clear the core principles remain unchanged. Fear of the unknown, psychological tension, and hauntingly atmospheric locations remain the central to this franchise success. Resident Evil franchise has become synonymous with survival horror, and much of its success can be attributed to the use of iconic labyrinthine environments, from the decaying grandeur of the Spencer Mansion to the claustrophobic halls of Raccoon City Police Department. The franchise has consistently utilized its settings to create tension, atmosphere, and sense of danger that permeates every corner of the game's world. We can only hope Capcom continues its legacy, crafting the world that leaves indelible mark on players' memories and push the boundaries of survival horror for generations to come.